we will get into it. Another monthly installment. This time we're going to talk about navigating seasonality, shifting shopper trends, holiday deals, all the exciting stuff because it is fall. You did get a pumpkin spice latte today. So I think this is
course.
but I'm here with Amanda, Director of Trade, Commercial Planning at Health-Ade Kombucha, everyone's favorite kombucha. But Amanda and I have known each other for a while now. Very excited to have her come speak. Please give us just the deep dive on your background. And then I obviously have some questions and we can just go back and forth.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So, I'll go back to my very first job right out of college, just working at Target in the stores. So I like to joke I was a 23-year-old managing a $23 million business. Why? That's a whole weird other question, not for today to discuss. But really, that was where I got my foray into retail and just loving kind of all things CPG. From there, I went over to Red Bull, where I spent literally my 20s in a variety of roles in sales, marketing, distribution, business ops, you kind of name it, for both the HQ team in Santa Monica, and I call that the North America HQ team, not in Austria, and then as well as like the West Regional team, which covered about 20 states. And from there, I actually moved over into Health-Ade, starting originally in the trade marketing role, which for those on calling more traditionally POS, coolers, trade show management. And as we've evolved, we've really up-leveled our shopper marketing capabilities, which naturally fell into our world as well, and really have elevated our partnerships with a number of retailers, which also floats the commercial planning part of my business because we're the natural bridge between sales and marketing.
And how has Health-Ade been? Last what? Has it been 5 years? How long have you been in Health-Ade?
Sometimes it feels like 5 years. It's actually only been 2.5. For all my fellow folks on the call that are so kind and joining from Health-Ade, I think they would also agree that it feels like I've been here as long as them, and they've been here longer than me. So I can appreciate that sentiment.
What's like your, I guess, experience so far? So I'm super familiar with the kombucha market. I'm an investor in the local brand in San Diego. So I can somewhat speak to, what's, the high season, the slow season. But for the folks that don't know, what is kind of that like peak season for kombucha sales? And then on the opposite side, what's kind of like the slower end for you guys?
Yeah, so this might not surprise you or anyone on the call, but our peak season is really going to be that new year, new you, healthy reset time period. So January, February timeframe, really big moment for us as a brand. And I think for a lot of other healthy beverage alternatives, kind of kickstarting those New Year's resolutions that hopefully you stick to. Most of the time we don't, but we have high aspirations, right? And then we really look at the next big time for summer. So I think beverage generally is a huge summertime refreshment opportunity. And with our really delicious flavors, you kind of meet a lot of those cue of refreshment during another really big key season.
And how do you prepare for those kind of like, I mean, I wouldn't call them dips, but when it's not going to be as I guess a high selling period is this summertime or the New Year's resolution. Like, is it more of a, hey, we just kind of want to maintain through this period, or are you still trying to figure out ways how to like grow the business during that time? What's like the mindset?
Well, we're always trying to grow the business. That homework never ends, right? I think, last year was a really huge innovation year for us. We actually launched, our cans 4-pack. So you can find them at Whole Foods, at Target, Walmart, and Sprouts. And I think that helped unlock some of those slower periods because now we've offered a on-the-go pack format that helps in those slower periods like springtime or back to college and those fall kind of moments. And then working with our sales team to also put promotional, support around those packs during that time period as well. So you'd expect our core business in our 16-ounce glass, the typical brown bottle, to be those huge moments because that is the lion's share. But now we have other kind of packs in our portfolio to offset those quote unquote slower seasons, I would say.
What's kind of your background as it relates to how many launches would you say you've kind of been a part of from this like limited edition flavor, these like holiday flavors that come out?
Yeah. So when I started at Health-Ade, we had our holiday cheers, infamous flavor that is kind of a taste of Christmas in a bottle. I think quite literally, it's like the plum cinnamon deliciousness. And as we've evolved kind of, the sell-in strategy and what seasonal means for us as a brand, we've actually moved it to a rotational seasonal SKU for us. So now instead of just holiday, we have a winter, spring, and then a summer, seasonal flavor as well. really trying to cue that excitement multiple times throughout the year as the brand, instead of just capitalizing on really one slower holistic beverage time with the holiday season.
And what's kind of the goal of these launches? Is it more, I guess, sales focused, like, hey, we want to sell and get an extra bump, or is it more like this is a good PR marketing play for us to get some eyeballs on the brand?
I think it's a little bit of both, right? So, sales always love the fresh, shiny new toy that they can go sell in and have something really excited to sell about. But also with the new flavors and, with the fantastic kick-ass flavors our R&D team puts together, it's also creating that buzz in the market with our loyal fans on our own channels and in media. As we start really thinking about the seasonal launches holistically, they have a long runway of distribution for us. And I think the beautiful thing of having the single UPC in multiple flavors right now is it gives us that way in to help, a longer navigating of retailers to, win multiple times throughout the year.
What are some successful launches that you've seen, and then what are some that maybe weren't as great as you would like them to be? And this is obviously putting you on the spot. I can put this in like a email and we can post this question later, but if you do
No,
have
it's okay. I love the surprise questions. You know, I would say I really have been very proud of the business as we've kind of launched, not only just our new flavors, but launching a whole different format for us was, I think, a whole different beast that we haven't tackled since we started over 12 years ago. And the way we brought in different properties, different, partnerships into the brand to help elevate that launch through our Dodgers partnership here in LA, through our new Ryan Seacrest and iHeartMedia properties. I think we really pulled out all the stops to help really elevate not only our whole brand, but those launches as well for more of a sustained approach. So that's on the kombucha side. I'll have to give a, RIP shout out to our Health-Ade Pop. It was our, pop prebiotic soda version that had a fermented tea base. And I think, this was ahead of, Olipop and Poppy's really, wild success. And I think at the time, it just wasn't the right fit for the market. It was in a 12 ounce slim can. We tried to do everything we could. It wasn't getting the sell in or sell through that we liked. And, I think we ultimately didn't have the right support behind the brand. And that's not to put any fault on our own. I think it was just, there's a lot of other business functions we were managing at the time. And I think the biggest key difference we see now is leading with our insights to launch a full innovation product, which at the time, Pop was a renovated version of Booch Pop and other products, as similar products that we had previously.
So I think that's a really good segue into another question that I had, but I have to think that Health-Ade has got this down to a science now on like, okay, we know these seasons are coming, this is what we're doing, and so on and so forth, planned out in advance. But at what stage, I guess, should brands start to consider, exploring these limited edition flavors or these big holiday promo collaborations? Is it when you're more established like a Health-Ade, or can you start doing it from day one as kind of an up and coming brand?
Yeah, I think it's really going to depend on the category and the nature of like your brand, like ethos. I would say from a beverage landscape, in my experience, you'll typically have more success coming from an established brand, right? Between the sell-in, the marketing, the manufacturing, and even just the development of flavor support. I think, these processes to get all of those in line develop over time and will optimize as the business continues to grow. But, no matter what, like I said, anytime you launch a new flavor, it has to start with the insights. Are you generating the demand? Is your consumer asking for it? Because if they're not, and you're just innovating to innovate, that extra pressure that you're putting on the team may actually make the launch and devalue some of the other, things you have going on in the business, or derail, I should say, from, what you're trying to achieve, which is success in your core business. So those are kind of the first key things I would consider. I think the other piece is, can your route to market and manufacturing actually handle a limited time offering? Because, no one wants to see a Christmas bottle on the shelves in April, right? So if you can't really sustain that momentum to make sure you get it off the shelves in a timely manner, that's also a key point you want to consider, as you're thinking about these limited time offerings.
That's one thing that I never really thought about. I have to think like the general consumer doesn't think about, like, when you go into, a CVS or something and you see a bottle kind of in the fridge, the amount of steps and things that had to go right for like this campaign to be aligned, to get there like in the right time, like the production, the marketing, the packaging, all of that had to go right to get that one bottle on the shelf. And it's just like, yeah. So given that, like, how early do you guys plan ahead for these type of campaigns? Is it like 6 months? Is it a year? Is like, what's kind of the cadence from a planning perspective?
I would say in let's talk about an Amanda world and then what we actually do. In Amanda world, it would be like a year in advance plus, right? Like really dialing in everything across the board and getting super ahead of it, especially knowing that like if you're doing something in January, you basically lose the last 6 weeks of the year more or less between all the holidays. So, you know, in the reality of the situation though is at Health-Ade, we typically really plan 4 to 6 months out for a lot of our new flavor. I would call it line extensions or pack formats. But when we think about as innovate beyond kombucha and really thinking about what that next level of our brand is going to look like, that could be a year plus in the making before you ever see something come to fruition. And that's a full team approach between manufacturing, R&D, marketing, our innovation team, our team on the sales side, you know, a full stop of almost everyone in the company, it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, we're in this, I feel like everybody's in the same boat. We'd love to have everything set in stone a year or so in advance, but like, yeah, I totally hear you. That's just like what comes with running a business. But when you guys do plan things in advance, like one thing that I'd be curious if you take into account is, I mean, shifting shopping habits, right? Like the way we shop now is different than pre-COVID and things like that. But as it relates to seasonality, have you seen kind of changes in consumer shopping habits? Like obviously it's cold out, so people in the Midwest don't really want to leave their house. So do you invest more in other avenues? Like what's kind of your guys' strategy from that standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, I think it's interesting that our biggest month is one of the coldest months of the year. So something we really look at is working with our sales counterparts from a full promotional calendar and understanding, okay, if we know January, May, August, September are going to be our biggest months, we need to have our biggest promotions and full stop support running at those times. And then we look at our other pack formats in those lower periods, like our can 4-pack or our 48 ounce, to start filling in the rest of the calendar accordingly to maintain that always on momentum through, I would say, the seasonality curve. What's also beautiful is having those different pack types is it accounts for those people that maybe only want to go out once in January. They can buy a multi-serve or a 4-pack, and maybe that'll last them a week. It might last some people a day. But what's really interesting is, you know, the kombucha category as a whole has a relatively low purchase frequency, about only 5 times throughout the year. And that's over 52 weeks. So you think about what can we do differently to start really elevating additional purchases throughout the year, whether that's through trade up offerings like our multi-serves or multi-packs, or the actual multi-buys on our single serves during those time periods to get people to, again, get more during those times.
Wait, is that 5 like individual bottles or is it just 5 purchases?
5 trips.
Yeah, could be a
Yeah.
big case.
So
And
maybe they're buying, you know, 2, 3 bottles on each trip, right? But you know, yeah, it's crazy how low it is.
wow, I did
Yeah.
not. I feel like I have one every single week, so I'm
Well, thank
probably
you. You're helping boost that number. We appreciate it.
listen. When you see an uptick in the velocities, just know it's me. I'm going down to my local store. And so what I guess like you talk about, hey, we know these are going to be the 4 biggest months of the year. Is your marketing budget also kind of skewing that way too? Or are you like, great, like we know our budget these months is going to be 30% higher than the rest of the year. And like, how does that like planning come into effect? And do you stray from that plan? Are you very strict on that? Like, what's kind of that whole process?
Yeah. So I think we look at it 2 ways. We first start with like, what are like the 3 or 4 things we want to always have on? We think about that from media, we think about and advertising, we think about it from retailer programming, such things and search, right? Like from branded search as well as our retail search, like an Instacart or sponsored search on our retailer.coms. And then our influencer programming. You know, those are going to be, I would say, our 3 things that we're keeping always on throughout the year. Then you have the layered support, I'll call on top of that, that's going to be the boosted of all of our, you know, extra push on own channels, added layered support, and all those other always on elements and more budget during those key moments to really help bolster those seasonal time periods. But, you know, I can't say it's 30% versus 20% versus 15 because frankly, I think everyone that's a marketer on this talk can attest to spend as much as you can in the first half so your budget doesn't get cut. But in the best case scenario, you don't have to cut your budget. You can maintain, at least you're always on programming at the very least throughout the rest of the year.
And then as it relates to like the entire marketing stack, how does seasonality, is it impacting as much on other, I guess, channels, like on the influencer side of things? It sounds like packaging and couponing, yes, because we know the specific months, but for the paid media, are we upping that during those specific months for the influencer campaigns, email, so on and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because we have such a breadth of flavors and items in our portfolio, you'll typically always see our pink lady apple or passion fruit tangerine, some of our core, we call them core 5 flavors in everything that we do. But during the spring months, you might see one of our glow up SKUs, so a strawberry glow or something that's a little more light and effervescent, showing up a little bit more frequently to capitalize on those seasonal moments. And then you might see, again, maybe a little bit more pomegranate in the fall season and elevating those kind of different flavors where they make sense accordingly. I could say the same thing for ginger, right? You expect to see a really high taken ginger lemon during January when trying to clear out your sinuses and hope for the best that, that spice will help. So we kind of shift, but we try to keep it really tight on our core 5 and then adjust, like I said, there's a couple different flavors throughout the calendar where it makes sense.
And what could smaller entry level brands do who don't have, larger budgets to run like either always on campaigns or things like that? Like from at least what you've seen, what are some like, I guess, scrappy for more or less, which I feel like is kind of overused now, but some scrappy methods that early stage brands can implement?
Yeah. So I've thought about this a couple times because I've, been asked this question for some different companies I help advise on. Instacart is one brand that I would say has just elevated their entire experience from just sponsored products to now full funnel approach. That if you only have a limited amount of money, put it all into Instacart because not only is it helping drive revenue and incremental sales, you also can now have the layered benefit of the shoppable display, driving awareness, and everyone is shopping on that platform at this point. And the way they're developing their ecosystem just makes it more approachable for a lot of brands. The next piece I'd say is, really lean into your own channel strategies. So, that's within your own teams. I would say you don't see a budget dollar that goes against that. You see people's blood, sweat, and tears as the valuation. But really, when you want to amplify your own channel support with email, SMS, more organic, like social, anything along that lens, that's going to be a really easy way to kind of gauge, excitement with your audiences and loyal fans, especially when you don't have a big budget. And then the third way I would say is retailer programming. Finally, I would say some of the biggest retailers are realizing that a lot of their up and coming brands don't have multi-millions of dollars to spend. And it's really nice because they want you to be a part of it. But when you go back and say, I don't have the funding, what else can we do? They're starting to find new ways and recognize of how you can get involved at a much more affordable price. So it comes down to asking the questions of, I'd love to be involved. How can I get more involved? What's available within this range? And frankly, if there's one thing I've learned, the more you are in their face about it, the more top of mind you'll be. So when something comes up that you might be like a good fit for, they are the ones coming to you and saying, hey, here's something we think you might be interested in. But, we understand budget might be a concern. How can we work together? And, it opens up the negotiating door just a little bit where it might not have been there before.
I have another question that I also is a new question because you just said that. What's the breakdown? You can do this high level or just talk more about the process of planning, right? Like there's so many different things at a brand's disposal that they like from a budget perspective that you can spend money on, right? And so how do you go about parsing out on a percentage basis? Like, okay, we know I've got X number of dollars for the year. I'm going to do this percentage for Instacart, this percentage for media, this percentage for couponing, this for, I don't know, influencer marketing. Like as it relates to like the retail side of things, like what's like your thought process around that?
Yeah, I'm gonna give a shout out to my budget buddies who I hope are listening because we go through a very fun process figuring out the budget breakdown each year. But what I think it really starts with, and I'll speak on the shopper marketing side, is I'm leaning heavily on my agency partners and retailer partners to get the full media kits and really looking at my sales promotional calendars where we can overlap some of the bigger moments with the added spend and figuring out what is my best in class budget look like, knowing it's likely not to get approved, but then I can at least have a good sense of where can I scale back from and what do I need to really hold firm on, like Instacart, my sponsored search campaigns accordingly. And that's where I think is really the root. We're a small team, I have one other person on my team, and that's about the best that we can get to because we don't have the bandwidth to necessarily say, okay, let me dig into every analytical report and figure out my exact base budget. And it becomes a conversation with the agency partners. I'm very transparent, as you know, of like, I don't have a ton of money. So tell me what's reasonable and what's right for my brand. Don't try to oversell me because you think that we need to spend $250,000 because I can tell you, that we don't. I know that we don't. So let's just cut the crap and let's talk reasonable numbers here.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then pivoting a little bit, going towards things that maybe don't cost actual dollar values, but take human capital. How often do you, I guess, look at collaborations with other brands? Like, I feel like at least lately, I've seen a lot of you have your typical like collab posts and giveaways, but we've even seen some folks do like product collaborations and things like that. Is that something that is on your guys' mind? Is it not? What's been your experience doing it in the past? If you have, would love to get the full rundown.
Yeah, so I would say during my time here at Health-Ade, we did a lot of the own channel giveaways, a variety of brands, but I think that really stemmed from finding the right brands for the right moment that kind of shared similar beliefs or similar, hey, we're trying to capitalize on this trend that's happening now. And I think that's actually really shifted as we've evolved with some of our bigger partnerships, like I mentioned, with Ryan Seacrest and iHeart, and leaning into their properties and big kind of support elements accordingly. And not necessarily leaving the rest of the smaller brands or partnerships behind. It's just getting us to think a little bit differently about who we partner with from a holistic lens because we have a lot of other kind of levers to pull with our current kind of partners, like Dodgers, etc.
Yeah. We'll change a little bit away from the Health-Ade side of things. You were also at Red Bull. How was that experience? You said you spent your 20s. Give us the full rundown on that.
Yeah, I mean, I loved my time at Red Bull. It was fun, energizing, ironically. And for those, I didn't drink a Red Bull every day. I was not amped up, and nor was I driving around a Mini. I did once, but no, I was not driving around a Mini in a Wings team girl. I worked in the field and behind a desk most of my time. But what that brand really does very well is create a massive network of partnerships, influencers, and athletes, creator networks, full stop brand partnerships that really differentiate themselves, I'd argue, amongst the rest of the energy brands out there. And they were really the first ones, I'd argue, to do influencer marketing before it was called influencer marketing, way back when it was launched as a brand in Europe. So, everything I know and everything I do today stems to what I learned from my different mentors and projects and teams I worked with at Red Bull. But I would say the biggest difference between my time here at Health-Ade and Red Bull is simply Health-Ade's a different, refrigerated brand, different consumer, different shopping behavior versus Red Bull being shelf stable. I would say the store is, your whole oyster, right? You get to have secondary displays. You can have a lot more fun with big, bright opportunities to interrupt shoppers, journey that we don't get necessarily that same, capability with being refrigerated or having to be refrigerated, I should say.
Is there any seasonality that comes with, I mean, at your time at Red Bull, is that something you came across? Is there a high season or a low season? I mean, I would imagine maybe no, but
Yeah. I would say it started with, we'll call it the 100 days of summer. So, not just June and July, it kind of stretched, Memorial Day through, I would say, even up until after, maybe even through September, was the biggest key seasonal time frame. I'd say the energy category has evolved over time with so much more of like the, zero sugar or sugar-free offerings that as, my time down there, I would say went away and I started, thinking about leaving, we started capitalizing a lot more on the January, February, like fitness reset and leaning into that as an occasion from like a full communications messaging and how we show up. And also then leading into the product side from like the sugar-free and zero offering. So there was two different branded campaigns that we ran during my time there that started getting outside of just summer, but I would argue summer is probably still the biggest time period for them.
You mentioned like having the whole store available to you. Are there any other, I guess, different strategies that you could do for Health-Ade that maybe wouldn't fit like, a cold non-shelf stable product versus kind of a shelf stable Red Bull or vice versa? Were there things that you did at Red Bull that like just would not kind of translate over to what you're doing at Health-Ade?
Yeah, I'll start with the second part of that. Corrugate, full stop. You could drop a full stack display, just all cardboard, put a bunch of product on it anywhere in the store and multiple stores, right? You wouldn't have to worry about it going bad. People, pick it up. Maybe they drink it right on the spot. I don't suggest, it's really best served cold, but people do it. So, I would say that's the biggest difference, that they have the end caps, the corrugate, all of that extra kind of like space to play with. That at Health-Ade, if we want those extra end caps or things, to play, they have to sit within a permanent space that has a cooler attached to it. So that's, I'd say, the biggest difference between the two. It just kind of limits where we can show up and how we can show up.
Are there any like online restrictions or anything like that? Like as like a alcohol brand, right? There's some things you can and can't say. And I know from like conversations that I've had with Red Bull, which maybe they're brand imposed, right? There are like specific things you can and can't say, at least in the energy space. Is there anything like that you came across, or it's kind of just fair game?
No, there's definitely, especially when it comes to marketing to children for energy drinks, there's a very, very detailed do and do nots communications. It's a very tight relationship with the legal team on that side. Basically everything and anything has to be cleared, from copy to like anything you'd see on a piece of POS or in a cooler to even on the can, like has to be approved, and make sure that it stays within regulatory, laws. And again, not marketed to anyone under the age of 18. On the Health-Ade side, it's similar. We do, when you go through the fermenting process, we have to burn off the alcohol to really keep it as a non-alcoholic beverage. And that's obviously something that we do on our manufacturing side. But it's definitely something that we keep very top of mind. And as our, manufacturing team works day in and day out, like making sure we keep below all of those levels and don't have to worry about, any sort of regulatory on the back end, should there be any issue.
Okay. Good to know. Getting to children, not good. Or
yeah, don't market to children.
Don't market
unless it's a children's beverage or a snack. Please don't market to children. I don't recommend. Sounds like a lot of like liability you don't need.
Yeah, you don't really want to get into that, and then hanging out with the legal team probably too much.
Yeah.
So I guess for Health-Ade, I'd love to just dive a little bit deeper on like, can you walk us through what a successful seasonal launch looks for you guys? Like leading up to the planning of it, the actual execution. You obviously mentioned data a lot. Like what data are you guys actually looking at to analyze like, hey, this is a good opportunity for us to launch this campaign? Because like if you're investing, 6 to 9 months, it's a big, it could be a big miss if it doesn't end up working out. And so like, what I guess is that process that you guys walk through to evaluate opportunities and then go live?
Yeah. And I would say this goes for not just our seasonal, but generally how we approach our larger kind of like moments in our calendar. It's going to really start with, like I said, our insights. What are the biggest times? Where do people want to hear from us and see, our brand show up? From a seasonal perspective, we start thinking about how we're going to launch this on our own channels with kind of like our super fans and loyalists first. Because as we think about the sell-in strategy at retail, that's going to happen during the natural sell-in cycle. And really that's where, these two deviate and then eventually come back together, because when we're going to launch on our own channels versus our sell-in at retail, sometimes line up, sometimes they don't. We're both in a, DSD kind of like, type of route to market, but we also have a number of other partners that they're more of a flow through. We ship them the product, they reset when they reset. We can't control that exact time and launch period as much as we would like to at the January 1st of every single, campaign, let's call it. The next piece I would say is it begins with a little bit of a teaser, right? Of like trying to generate some excitement. And then it's really locking in all of the plans and finding those moments in our retailer calendars as well to showcase the product. Say, hey, the holiday is coming up. Let's make sure we feature our holiday cheers to you along our Pink Lady Apple and make them more the hero as much as we can throughout that relative time period alongside our core products.
From the planning perspective, how do you know, and if this is more of like an ops question, you can just say that, but how do you know, I guess, how much product to produce for a seasonal? Do you always like undershoot it so like, hey, we're not going to have any on hand, which is great? Or what's like, is there like a formula that you guys use to come up with that? What's kind of that process?
Yeah. So what's really amazing about our brand is we manufacture all the products right here in Torrance. So we have the full capability to kind of own the production and forecasting within our control. So, if we know that we're running a really big seasonal campaign with a large retailer that we're going to need that added volume, we're building that into the forecast. But, from the commercial side, we're also doing our best to make sure that that product runs out within the allocated time period that we want it to be on shelf as best as possible. I'd argue this year is our first year really doing that super well. And to your point, undershooting a little bit, but making sure those couple of retailers have the product on shelf for the lifetime we want to see the product on shelf, but not necessarily a full market where it makes sense.
Do you guys ever do like exclusive with retailers? Is that something that you've seen as a good strategy for these types of products? Like, hey, we're going to do apple pie for the 4th of July exclusive flavor with Kroger. Like, has that been something you guys have done? And if so, like, has it gone well? What was kind of your experience with that?
Yeah. So the last time we did that was before my time, but I can speak to what I know. We launched our Strawberry Glow exclusive flavor with Target, and that was a really huge moment for us. I believe it was, if not our first kind of exclusive product flavor to a major retailer. We had a massive influencer, big campaign, shopper marketing, kind of you name it, that launched with it to help really drive its wild success. And if I recall, it was actually the top selling kombucha flavor, I think almost right out of the gate, because it had kind of a very different new kind of like offering that wasn't available for Target shoppers at that time with the biotin and kiwi extract. So I would say, yes, we've done it in the past. How we look at it now, again, because we manufacture and produce everything in-house, it has to really hit those minimum order quantities to make it profitable for us. I think we are always evaluating opportunities where it makes sense, but it becomes a collaborative effort between sales, ops, and our team to make sure it has to be, financially viable.
Have you thought about doing any, I guess, like influencer collab flavors? I know you had one promote kind of the Target launch, but specific to a person. Has that something that you guys have thought about doing? Like Dough Foods, for example, does this all the time, and another brand as well. And seems to be like super successful. It's a big moment and then kind of on to the next one. But is that something that you guys have looked into, or more like, hey, we're going to do seasonal flavors and kind of stick to that?
It's definitely something we've looked into, and definitely like always considering, especially as we have some of our new kind of like properties and partners come into the fold. What could that look like for us to do something custom for, let's say, the Dodgers or with Ryan, and what could that actually come to fruition and look like? But it's all part of a discussion, and again, feeding into all of the other selling priorities our team has, making sure that we're not losing sight of what's really important that's going to drive the long-term business goal versus kind of the blip that may not be able to sustain.
Amazing. Well, we have some crowd questions.
Okay.
So move to those.
Okay.
Question number 1, which is great because I hadn't even think about this. So we obviously are in the US. We live in Southern California, you and I, very lucky, blessed. But are there any, I guess, what are the differences, right, from American seasons, American seasonality, holidays, things like that, relative to maybe globally as it relates to other countries? Is that something that you've come across? How do people balance that? Is it more of like a, hey, this is our like EU team, they handle all of that, and we're over here? Like, I'm assuming Red Bull probably runs into this, right? Or something like
Yeah.
that. Is this something that you've kind of come across to evaluate maybe like regional versus global?
Yeah. I would say Health-Ade, we're really only here in the US and Canada. So our seasons are kind of going to remain relatively similar. And you're going to see kind of our biggest, I would say, like markets on the coast, right? And eventually it's starting to move inland as kombucha becomes a bit more mainstreamed. But as it relates to the European trends, I don't have the firsthand experience, but from what I've been shared, that it's a very different dynamic of like culture and lifestyle living, where it's a lot more outdoor, it's a lot more walking, it's a lot more like on the go. Where here we're driving in our cars, especially in LA, to get every single place. So I think some of those like lifestyle behaviors actually will influence some of the seasonality that might be slightly different from literal weather changes in Europe.
And what are some, I mean, we've talked about insights. What are some analytics, metrics that you guys like, very specific, or you don't have to get as specific as you don't want to, but that you guys evaluate, when looking at a seasonal campaign? Was this a success? Was it not? Is it just purely sell through and velocity? Like, hey, we sold through everything in the period that we wanted it to? Or are there other metrics that go into that, evaluation?
Yeah. So we'll always be looking at every year as we kind of have our now rotational SKU, what is the unit rate of sale that we saw, from a certain SKU to another? Does it make sense to bring back that SKU for a second year? Did it meet our expectations? And not only from, to your point, the sell in and sell through and on the manufacturing side, but did it also meet the retailer expectations, right? Because if it's actually lower than what we see for our average seasonal SKU, that might be something to consider. Should we bring this back or not? I think the other piece is we constantly are looking at household penetration, buy rate, and purchase frequency as our next kind of 3 core shopper metrics that are really diving not only for the seasonality of, is a product working for us, but generally how are we performing as a brand? And are these seasonal SKUs really helping bolster that growth? Or are we kind of remaining flat when we see these other elements happening?
What do you use to measure that? Are there any like kind of those, the one to measure, right, is units per store, right? That's, you can see that pretty easily, but
Yeah.
those other things that maybe you can't, right? Like, what's the brand sentiment? What's like the marketing impact of this? Are there any like tools that you use to measure that, or is it kind of just surveying, or what do you do for that?
Yeah, I would say Numerator is one of our like core partners that we do a ton of consumer insights and shopper insights, kind of like, I would say, reporting, support, surveys across the board. They're a very valued partner for us, and we really, go to them with a variety of questions, anything and anything under the sun. And they're all the resources at their, disposal to help us uncover a lot of business questions that maybe just spins or other data platforms just don't have the capabilities to answer.
Okay. Last question.
Okay.
I know you mentioned minimum order quantities from the retailers, but how does a brand, I guess, balance seasonal production or seasonal promos as it relates to like inventory? We don't want to have too much product. We don't want to be completely sold out unless it's just like a pure marketing campaign for that. Are there any tools you use to estimate kind of, hey, we think this is going to be XYZ at these stores? Obviously you have like your lower watermark, like, hey, we need to sell this amount for this to be a profitable campaign, but what do you use to kind of like estimate what it's actually going to do in store?
Yeah, I think it depends. It's going to be a mixture of the forecasted volume we're expecting, to your point, from our production team. Like, hey, we have to sell 15,000 cases of this product to be minimally viably profitable. Then we look at our top retailers, what percent of, Whole Foods would be necessarily contributing to that, and then start backing in the math that way a little bit to get to, okay, this retailer must sell X to get to our total, like, I would say, minimum order that's going to make this viable. Of course, we're trying to hedge to make sure that, we aren't, not on shelf when it makes sense. But at the same time, there might be a week, 2 weeks where it might be a little bit shortchanged because we're trying to avoid, having the extra inventory on shelf. I would say it's a bit of an art and a science.
And a little bit of experience to get it.
And a little bit of experience. Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah. I will say we did have I shouldn't say we did. We still do have a long tail of products in our portfolio. So sometimes we'll use some of our slower moving items as benchmarks as well. Of, hey, we're really depending on the momentum and how much we're putting against a seasonal item, we might use, like, I would call it, I love our mint limeade, but it's just a slower moving item for us. It doesn't have as much distribution. We could use that as a benchmark for an upcoming seasonal, depending on if it's gaining more distribution than a simpler SKU.
We got one last question in at the buzzer. How do you approach connecting with your consumers one-on-one to hear what they think rather than assuming what they think? Is it email marketing surveys, social polls like on Instagram? Is it through things like Numerator? Is that really like your top thing? Which, like, I'm not super familiar with their pricing structure, but I do know that sometimes it can get expensive for kind of smaller brands. What are some like strategies that you guys have used?
Yeah, definitely Numerator for surveys. Our consumer insights director does a fantastic job with a variety of different partners, doing surveys from Merrifield, sourcing, their platform of, panelists as well. Numerator also has a panel. We also do a lot of different surveys on our email, SMS, also within our organic stories. Sometimes you might see a question pop up in like an Ask Me Anything type format. And then also on our own channel moderation. So there's going to be a variety of commentary that's going to come through and different trends we start seeing that our social team kind of managing that will bring to light to us as the marketers of, hey, we're noticing, our, bottles used to be very difficult to open. How can we help, fix this? What is our next step? It's a pretty consistent theme. And that was a really core insight for us to basically change. Now you might see a much easier bottle cap on all of our products now. So that's just one example, maybe not the best, but it's a start.
It was a great example.
Okay.
No, okay, thank you. Well, that's it for today. But Amanda, thank you so much. This was awesome and super informative, and it's like always so interesting as I feel like there's more and more kind of cold storage products out, like just to hear the things that you guys are going through, the problems you're solving. So thank you for giving us 45 minutes of your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you everybody for tuning in. And then next month we will be doing this again. But Amanda, thank you.